Welcome back to Living Every Day with Passion and Purpose. In this program, we're going to talk about 10 minutes a day. We're going to talk about how in my late teen years, 10 minutes a day changed my life forever, and how I hope 10 minutes a day can change your life forever. Thank you. Good evening. Once upon a time, there was a pastor, and every Saturday afternoon, he used to travel around visiting different families from his church. And this one particular Saturday afternoon, he came to this one house, and he knocked on the door, and nobody came to answer. He knew someone was home, the radio was on, the television was on, so he knocked a little bit louder, and still nobody came to answer. So finally, he stood there, he pounded on the door, waited 3 or 4 more minutes, and still nobody came to answer the door. So he took out one of his cards, and he wrote a little note on the back of the card, and he propped the card in the door to let the people know that he'd come to visit. About 20 minutes later, a woman who was obviously in the house while he had been knocking at the door came to go out the door, and as she stepped out the door, the card fell out of the door and onto the floor. She picked it up, she looked at it curiously and realized that the pastor had come to visit. She turned it over, and on the back, he had written a scripture reference, Revelations chapter 3, verse 20. So she's curious. She goes back in the house, she picks up a Bible. She flips open to Revelations chapter 3, verse 20, which reads, "Behold, I am standing at the door knocking, and should anyone come and answer the door, I will come in and we will sit down and share a meal together." Well, the next morning, Sunday morning, the pastor realizes that the card he left in this woman's door the day earlier is now in the bottom of the collection basket. He looks at it curiously, picks it up out of the collection basket, turns it over, discovers that his scripture reference has been crossed out and replaced with another scripture reference which reads Genesis chapter 3, verse 10. So he goes back into his place, and he picks up his Bible, he flips open to Genesis chapter 3, verse 10 and reads, "Behold, I heard you walking in the garden, but I was naked and afraid, so I hid myself." How would you like your life to be different 1 year from now than it is today? How would you like your life to be different 1 year from now than it is today? And if it isn't, who will you blame? What will you put it down to? You see, my experience has been that most people want their lives to change. Most people want their lives to change. Maybe not completely, but one area, one aspect. Most of us, we want our lives to change. But they don't. And they don't because we live in the miscredited fantasy that one day we will wake up and all of a sudden it'll just be magically different. Magically new. We live in the illusion that if we had more money or lived on a different street or drove a different car or vacationed in all the right places every year, then our lives would change. But these things don't change our lives. Our lives change when our habits change. Our lives change when our habits change. It doesn't matter if it's Michael Jordan or Mother Teresa, the very same principle applies. Our lives change when our habits change. I mean, Michael Jordan, he's a great example. Here's a guy who could not make his high school basketball team. Michael Jordan couldn't make his high school basketball team. All of a sudden, he's the greatest basketball player in history. How does that happen? Some people tell you freak luck. Some people tell you chance. Some people tell you must have been in the right place at the right time. Some people tell you must have had some good contacts over at the Bulls organization. And all of those people would be wrong. Our lives change when our habits change. When Michael Jordan couldn't make his high school basketball team, he came to his coach. He said, "Coach, I really want to play basketball." Jordan's coach said, "Michael, there's a lot of good players here at school." Jordan said, "Coach, you didn't hear me. I really want to play basketball." His coach said, "Michael, well, to be honest with you, your statistics from the free throw line are pathetic. woefully inadequate, and they're keeping you off the team. So what does Jordan do? He practices his free throw. How does he do it? He makes 600 free throws every day for 10 years. 600 free throws every day for 10 years. Doesn't shoot 600 free throws every day for 10 years. Makes 600 free throws every day for 10 years. Won't let himself go to bed each night until he's made 600 free throws. When would you next go to bed again? If you didn't go to bed again until you'd made 600 free throws. Our lives change when our habits change. It's not freak luck, and God doesn't have any favorites. Our lives change when our habits change. What is success? What is success to you? I think at some point in our lives, we all have to answer that question for ourselves. And it's easy to get caught up in other people's idea of what success is, whether it be our parents or our friends, our teachers, our coaches, our mentors, or just the culture. At some point in our lives, we all have to decide what success is for ourselves. Ralph Waldo Emerson's definition of success perhaps is the most famous. He wrote, "To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthier child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded." What is success to you? Growing up in Australia, as a teenager, I fell head over heels for the modern lie. The modern lie is that life is about success. The modern world tells us the meaning of life is to be successful. And they promise us that when we are successful, we'll be happy. We ask the modern world, the modern culture, what is success? The modern world tells us big house, fast car, important job, vacationing in all the right places every year, wearing expensive clothes with fancy labels on them, and having lots of money in the bank. And the modern world promises us that when we have these things, we'll find happiness. And you and I, we want to be happy. We yearn for happiness. And so we chase these things. We chase these things, believing that they'll make us happy, believing that they'll bring happiness to our lives. And as a teenager, I fell head over heels for this modern lie. And so when I graduated from high school, I went off to college to study a double degree in marketing and finance to plot my ascent to the top of the business world so that I could be successful, so that I could have all these things, so that I could be happy. Because like you, I yearn for happiness. But about a year into my college degree, I started to experience this restlessness within me, this sense that something was wrong, this sense that something was missing, this feeling that there must be more to life than this. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. Maybe you're experiencing it yourself. For a while, I told myself, it's just a phase, it'll pass. Just ignore it, just carry on. But it didn't go away. The restlessness within me got greater and greater. And then one Sunday afternoon, I was out at a barbecue with some of my mates, and I noticed across the way a friend of my family's was there, and he was probably 15 years older than me at the time, 32, 33, old. And I didn't want to be seen with the old people. So I was sort of ignoring him, avoiding him for the afternoon. But about midway through the afternoon, he came over to me, he cornered me, he said, "How are you, Matthew?" I said, "Fine." He said, "How's college?" I said, "Fine." I don't know if you've noticed, but when you're a teenager, the answer to every question is fine. How was your day? Fine. What did you do? Fine. What would you like for dinner? Fine. He said to me, "How are you, Matthew?" I said, "Fine." He said, "How's college?" I said, "Fine." But he was a doctor, and doctors, they know how to ask questions, don't they? They sort of probe around until they get to the heart of the matter. Well, he asked his questions. He probed around the different areas of my life for maybe 10, 15 minutes. Then he paused. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Matthew, you're not really happy, are you?" I was ashamed to admit it. I guess our culture teaches us that too, to pretend that everything's fine, even when it isn't. But I knew that he knew. And secretly, I hoped that he might be able to help me. So I said to him, you know what, I'm not happy. I've got this restlessness within me, this sense that something's wrong, the sense that there must be more to life than just this. He listened to me patiently for maybe 10 minutes. And then he said to me, well, what do you think's causing it? I said, I don't know what's causing it. I'm doing well in college. I have a great girlfriend. I have a great group of friends. I have a great part-time job. I'm doing well in my sports. I've looked at all the areas of my life. I can't work out what's wrong. He said to me, well, maybe nothing's wrong. I said, what do you mean? He says, maybe something's missing. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, maybe you want to think about spending some time in church. I said, no, I go to church every Sunday. He said, that's not what I mean. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, maybe you want to think about just stopping by church on the way to college each morning, just for 10 minutes, and just sit there in the quiet, spend some time in prayer. I wanted to strangle him. I just finished bearing my soul to this guy, and he wants me to sit in an empty church for 10 minutes a day. I thought to myself, what sort of religious freak have I got on my hands here? I thought to myself, what sort of fanatic is this guy? I didn't tell him I thought he was a freak. I didn't tell him I thought he was a fanatic. I just sort of nodded and smiled. You know how we do that sometimes? Yeah, I noticed some of you have been doing it for about 15 minutes now. So I just sort of nodded and smiled and immediately resolved to ignore everything he had to say. But about 6 weeks later, I'm on my way to college one morning. I'm passing by the church. The nagging restlessness hasn't gone away. The sense that something is wrong, missing, the sense that there must be more to life hasn't gone away. I had 10 minutes to spare and nothing to lose. So I walk in the back of church and I sit way up the back. And I spend 10 minutes sitting there just planning my day. I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And just by planning my day, a wonderful sense of peace. I felt peaceful. I think it's the first time in my adult life where I consciously remember feeling genuinely peaceful. And I liked it. So I came back again the next day on the way to college. I sat way up the back, 10 minutes, just planning my day. Gonna do this, gonna do that, gonna go there. I did this every day for about 3 weeks. And then one day I'm sitting up the back and I finished planning my day, and it occurred to me that, planning a day isn't really prayer, I mean, in the strictest sense of the word. So I decided to spend some time in prayer. I said, all right, listen up, God. Your servant is speaking. I want this, 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 I want this. Get busy on that, God. Have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow. I was so proud of myself because I was really praying now, I come back again the next day. I sit up the back. I plan my day. I give God his instructions for the day. And then I go to college. I do this every day for about 3 weeks. And then one day, I'm sitting way up the back. I finished planning my day. I finished giving God his instructions for the day. And I remember on this particular day, I had this situation, this problem in my life. And I remember just looking up towards the tabernacle and saying, listen, God, I got a problem here. This is the situation. These are the circumstances. God, what do you think I should do? And with that one question, my life began to change. God, what do you think I should do? I call it the big question. As far as I'm concerned, it is the ultimate question. It is the only question. And yet it is the question that has almost completely slipped from the inner dialogue of modern men and modern women. So you're in high school. Let's assume you graduate high school at the age of 18. Let's assume you go into college, you graduate college in 4 years, you graduate college at the age of 22. And then let's assume, like most people, you go out and you get a real job in the real world, working 40 hours a week. Let's assume you work 40 hours a week, 48 weeks of the year, which gives you 4 weeks vacation, which is 2 weeks more than most people. And let's assume you'll work until the age of 65 and retire at the age of 65 like most people. Between the age of 22 and 65, working 40 hours a week, 48 weeks of the year, having 4 weeks vacation, which is 2 weeks more than most people, by the time you retire at the age of 65, you will have worked 86,400 hours. Yeah, 86,400 hours. Now let's put that in perspective. You got a boring class at school? You had a boring class at school? How long does the class last? Maybe an hour? But when you're in the middle of that boring class, how slowly does time tick away? Very, very, very slowly. Now I want you to immerse yourself in that experience. I want you to multiply that by infinity and take it to the depths of eternity, and you still have got barely a glimpse of what you're in store for unless you think about how you want to spend your 86,400 hours. You see, most people lead lives of quiet desperation. They don't plan to lead lives of quiet desperation. They don't sit there in high school and think to themselves, you know what, when I grow up, I'd like to lead a life of quiet desperation. It doesn't work like that. It's just that they spend the first half of their life saying, I'm too young to ask the big questions. And we're never too young to ask the big questions, because they're the questions that give direction to our lives. They're the questions that give us our connection with our passion and our purpose. People don't plan to lead lives of quiet desperation. They just wake up when they're 40. And they wake up next to a person, they think to themselves, why did I marry that person? They think to themselves, do I love that person? They think, well, let's back off from that a minute. Do I even like that person? They think to themselves, when was the last time I even had a 5-minute decent conversation with that person? And while they're in the middle of that thought, they get crash tackled by 3 kids and a dog jumping on the bed, so they're not able to finish that thought. They get up, they have some breakfast, they fill their system with black poison, because they can't get through the day anymore without their coffee. And then they get in their car and they drive to work. They think to themselves, you know what? I don't like my job. They think to themselves, no, you know what? I hate my job. They try to console themselves by saying, oh, but it pays the bills. But then they think, you know what? It doesn't even pay the bills that well. And they're only halfway through their 86,400 hours, and all of a sudden they're leading a life of quiet desperation. They didn't plan to lead a life of quiet desperation. They just ended up there. Why? They didn't ask the big questions. They told themselves, I'm too young to ask the big questions. They told themselves, oh, I can ask the big questions later. They didn't plan to lead a life of quiet desperation, but all of a sudden, they're swallowed up by it. Those who fail to plan can plan to fail. 130 years ago, Henry David Thoreau wrote, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. It was true 130 years ago. In the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to travel in 50 countries. I've had the opportunity to travel in all 50 states of your great country. And I've seen nothing to believe that Thoreau would change his mind today. Most men, most women lead lives of quiet desperation. Why? Because we've lost sight of this one big question. God, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? Because when we've got a decision to make in our lives, we go to just about everyone who just knows just about everything about just about nothing. We say to them, excuse me, you look like you know just about nothing about just about nothing. I've got this really big decision I've got to make in my life. What do you think I should do? They tell us something we don't like, because let's face it, let's be honest. We've already decided what we want to do. Yes or yes? We've already decided what we want to do. We're just looking for someone to support our opinion, to make us feel good about it. They tell us something we don't like, we come to the next person, excuse me, you look like you know just about nothing about just about nothing. I've got this really big decision to make in my life. What do you think I should do? They tell us something we don't like, so we go to the next person. Excuse me, you look like you know just about nothing about just about nothing. I've got this really big decision to make in my life. What do you think I should do? And you know what they tell us? They tell us that they think we should do the same thing that we've already decided we wanted to do to begin with. You know what we say to that person? You're a very wise person. I can see God is working in you. And then we go off and do what we wanted to do to begin with. Do we find happiness in that way? No. No, we don't. Why? Because we've avoided that one fundamental question, the big question, the only question, the ultimate question. God, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? Because you and I, we're making decisions every day. Big decisions, small decisions. But let me ask you, when was the last time you stepped into the classroom of silence, sat down with your God, and said, God, what do you think I should do? When was the last time you stepped into the classroom of silence, sat down with the divine navigator and said, God, give me some direction? When was the last time you stepped into the classroom of silence, sat down with the divine architect and said, God, show me the plans. Show me the plans. Because after all, He is the one with all the answers to all the questions. So why do we go looking for advice from just about everyone who knows just about nothing, instead of turning to the one who can lead us towards the path that was created for us, destined for us? Because it's only in that path that we'll live life passionately, energetically, enthusiastically, and embrace that abundant life that God invites us to. 10 minutes a day. It's where it started for me 10, 12 years ago. 10 minutes a day. Deceptively simple, but simplicity is the key to perfection. Simplicity is genius and the key to perfection. So when you go home tonight, I want you to write down on a small piece of paper 10 minutes a day. I want you to stick it on your bathroom mirror where you brush your teeth. Tomorrow morning you wake up, you're brushing your teeth. I want you to ask yourself, when can I get 10 minutes today to spend in the classroom of silence with my God to ask the big question, God, what do you think I should do? You do that every day for 6 weeks, you won't even recognize yourself. Our lives change when our habits change. It's not freak luck. It's not chance. Our lives change when our habits change. But I'll tell you what will happen. Human nature. Tremendously predictable. 90% of you will go home tonight and you will say to yourself, oh, I don't have to write it down, I'll remember. And you are finished from the start. Do not even have a chance. By freak luck or chance, you might do your 10 minutes tomorrow or the day after that. But 2 days, 3 days at the most, it'll be all over for you. 10% of you will actually go home tonight. 10% of you will actually go home tonight. You actually write down on a small piece of paper 10 minutes a day. You actually stick it on your bathroom mirror. You wake up tomorrow morning, you look at that, you think, yeah, my 10 minutes. You'll do it first thing. You'll probably even go down to your church tomorrow morning and do your 10 minutes in the classroom of silence. And you'll sit down there and you'll do your 10 minutes and it'll pass so quickly you won't do 10 minutes, you'll do 20 minutes tomorrow. You won't be able to believe how quickly the time passed. You'll feel so peaceful and so focused. You say to yourself, how did I ever live without this? You'll promise yourself, I'm going to do this every day for the rest of my life. That's Saturday. You wake up on Sunday, you say, well, I'm going to go to church today, and that's a whole hour, so I don't need my 10 minutes. You wake up on Monday, it's been a long, busy weekend, so you slap at the snooze button a few times. You don't do it Monday morning, but Monday at lunchtime, you find a quiet place in the corner, you spend your 10 minutes. Tuesday, you don't do it in the morning, you don't do it at lunchtime, you come home in the evening, you're a bit exhausted. So you have some dinner, you sit down in front of the idiot box, it's about 11:30 Tuesday night, you think to yourself, I really should go in and do my 10 minutes. So you turn the television off, you sit down over in the corner, you do your 10 minutes. Wednesday, you don't do it in the morning, you don't do it at lunchtime, you don't do it in the evening. You're just walking in to brush your teeth on Wednesday night, and it occurs to you, ooh, I didn't do my 10 minutes. And you know you're going to walk into the bathroom, and the note's going to be there, and it's going to hold you accountable. So, you have a decision to make. Few options. A, you don't brush your teeth, you know. So you don't have to go in there and look at it and feel accountable and guilty. You don't brush your teeth. B, you do brush your teeth, but you just sort of put your head down in the sink so you don't have to look at the note. C, the most likely, C, you do brush your teeth, but on Wednesday night you practice horizontal prayer. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The problem with horizontal prayer is it never does last 10 minutes, does it? Next Thursday, well, you don't do it next Thursday because you're feeling guilty about the horizontal prayer on Wednesday. Next Friday, you don't do it because you're feeling guilty about not doing it on Thursday. And then you take the note down. You take the note down off the mirror because it's sort of uncomfortable to see it there, isn't it? It makes you feel miserable and pathetic that you can't spend 10 minutes a day in the classroom of silence. So you take it down so you don't have to be held accountable any longer. And for 90% of the 10%, 1 week from today, the resolution is dead, it is buried, it is all over. 6 weeks from now, the only thing you'll remember about tonight is that some guy came and he had a cool accent. You'll say to yourself, what was that guy's name? Yeah, don't remember. 1% of you will actually go home tonight, write down on a small piece of paper 10 minutes a day, stick it on your bathroom mirror, and spend 10 minutes each day in the classroom of silence. 6 weeks from now, you won't even be able to recognize yourself. You look in the mirror one day and you'll see sparkle back in your eyes. People start to say to you, you look different. Did you get a haircut? Love is the best beautician. Love is the best beautician. When people are in love, you can just tell. 50 feet away, just by the spark in their eyes, the glow in their face, the way they walk, the way they move, the way they hold them. When people are in love, you can tell. Love is the best beautician. And it's that love, it's that passion, energy, excitement, enthusiasm that God's inviting us to. Our lives change when our habits change. It's not freak luck, and God doesn't have any favorites. I mean, you look at the difference between the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, and the saints that fill the history books, and the rest of the masses marching through history. You know, it's not freak luck. It's not that they were in the right place at the right time. You look at the difference between the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, the saints that fill the history books, and the rest of us, you discover they just have better habits. When you dissect their days, their weeks, their months, you discover the things they're doing every day, every week, every month, with unerring consistency, are helping them become the best version of themselves. And too often, when you dissect our days and our weeks and our months, you discover the things we're doing every day, every week, every month, with unerring consistency, are helping us, causing us to become some second-rate, lesser version of ourselves. Our lives change when our habits change. How would you like your life to be different this year than it was last year? And if you want your life to be different this year than it was last year, at school, at work, on the sporting field, in your relationships, however you want, whatever area of your life you want to be different this year than it was last year, the only one way to do that is change your habits. Our lives change when our habits change. Where does it begin? In prayer. It begins in prayer. Because prayer is a contraction that produces an expansion. Prayer is a contraction that produces an expansion. The world has no value for prayer today because the philosophy of the world is what you do and what you have are the most important things. The world, the culture, the media wants to tell you what you do and what you have are the most important things. I mean, whenever you meet someone, whenever you meet someone, what do they say? What do you do? Automatically judged by what you do. What do you do? And all of a sudden you answer, what do you do? And you're in the box. You're in the box because that's the way people judge people. That's the way people value people. And just after they ask you, what do you do? They ask you, what sort of car do you drive? Because the world's philosophy is that what you do and what you have are the most important things. We spoke last night about a very different philosophy. Because the truth is, who you become is infinitely more important than what you do or what you have. Who you become is infinitely more important than what you do or what you have. The journey from point A to point B, the journey from the person you are today, strengths and weaknesses, to the person you're capable of becoming, the best version of yourself. The things you do only have value in as much as they help you become the best version of yourself, in as much as they help you grow in virtue, become the better person you know you can be. The things you have only have value in as much as they help you become all you can be, in as much as they help you become the best version of yourself. Starkly different to the philosophy of the world, which says what you do and what you have are the most important things. And in this philosophy, in this culture where we value what we do and what we have, we don't value prayer. Why? Because to the unspiritual naked eye, when you sit down to pray, it appears that you are not doing anything and that the activity you're participating in doesn't increase the things you have. And that's why our culture doesn't value prayer. But the truth is, prayer is a contraction that produces an expansion, much like atomic energy. Much like atomic energy. The contraction that produces the expansion. One of the first things we need to understand when we come to prayer is, what is our goal? What is the objective of prayer? You know, we come to football, we know that the objective is to score touchdowns. We come to golf, we know that the objective is to finish with the least amount of strokes. We come to business, we know that the objective is to make money, to satisfy customers so that they keep coming back, so that we keep making money. But very often when we come to prayer, when we approach spiritual situations, we're not always aware of what the goal is. The first thing we need to understand when we come to prayer is, what is the objective of prayer? One of the first things we need to understand when we come to prayer is that as a human being, we're a body and a soul. A delicate composition of body and soul, which is carefully linked by the will and the intellect. If you imagine for a moment that this hand is the spirit, the soul is always very, very still. Soul is always very, very still. We believe that God dwells within us, God dwells within the soul. Always very, very, very still. Now imagine that this other hand is the conscious mind. The conscious mind is always being distracted by the things we see, the things we do, the things we hear, the things that happen around us. Everything always distracting the conscious mind. The first thing we need to do when we come to prayer is to slow this down so that the two can meet. This is what we call union with God. And this is the primary purpose of prayer. The fruits of this union with God is an increased ability to love, an increased ability to be loved, peace, joy, love, laughter. The fruits of prayer, the fruits of this union with God. But too often when we come to prayer, we rush into the back of church, we sit at the back, we say, listen up, God, I want this. Have a good day, God, get busy on that, and I'll see you tomorrow. And we don't slow this down, we only speed this up even more. And people pray like this. People pray like this every day for a month, for a year, for 10 years, for 25 years. And then at some point in that journey, they say, you know what, prayer doesn't work. God doesn't answer my prayers, and I don't feel any more peaceful when I pray. The truth is, they never slowed this down even a little bit to experience that union with God, which is the primary focus of prayer, the primary purpose of prayer. Now, it's lovely for us to stand around here all night and talk about it. But the truth is, you only learn to ride a bicycle by riding a bicycle. You only learn to play baseball by playing baseball. You only learn to cook by cooking. You could read every book there was to read about baseball, but it wouldn't make you a great baseball player. And so it is with prayer. The only way to learn to pray is to pray, is to get comfortable in that silence, is to get comfortable in that silence. But the truth is, we're not comfortable in the silence. We're not comfortable in the silence. If I stop speaking here, after about 10 seconds, people would start to cough. After about 10 seconds, people would start to cough. if I stop speaking here. We're not comfortable in the silence. I saw in USA Today 3 or 4 years ago now, you know, they had that little section down on the bottom left-hand corner. You know, they do these little surveys. You know, I saw this survey. The 10 things that Americans were most uncomfortable with or most afraid of. Number 1, death and dying. Number 2, flying. Number 3, public speaking. Number 4, spiders and snakes, I think. Number 5, silence. Silence. We're afraid of silence. We're uncomfortable in the silence. Why? Let's try it this way. Is everyone familiar with Da Vinci's portrait of the Last Supper? Yes or yes? Yeah. It's the one where all the people are on one side of the table, you know? I don't know about you, but I always thought that was a little bit strange, you know? I don't know what happens at your house, but at my house we don't do it like that, you know? I don't know what Da Vinci thought Jesus might have said that night, you know? Maybe Da Vinci, you know, in meditating upon the scene, thought that Jesus said something like, all right, guys, on this side of the table, we're going to take the photo now. When Da Vinci decided to paint this portrait of the Last Supper, he decided that he wanted to find 13 men that looked like what he thought Jesus and the disciples would have looked like. So he began walking through the streets of Milan. He was living in Milan at the time. He began walking through the streets of Milan, searching the faces of men, looking for men that looked like what he thought Jesus and the disciples would have looked like. And one Sunday he was at church and he looked up into the choir loft and he saw a young man that looked like what he thought Jesus would have looked like. He approached the young man and explained to him what he was doing and asked him, would he agree to pose while Da Vinci made some sketches for his painting. The young man agreed, and he came to Da Vinci's studio for 3-4 days while Da Vinci set about beginning his famous portrait of the Last Supper. And when Da Vinci was finished painting the picture of Jesus, he began his search for each of the disciples, walking through the streets of Milan each day for hours at a time. And in 7 months, he found and painted all of the 12 disciples except one, Judas. He found a Peter and a John and a Matthew, but he couldn't find a man that looked like what he thought Judas would have looked like. He began walking through the streets of Milan 8-10 hours a day, obsessing, searching for a man that looked like what he thought Judas would have looked like, but nothing. And finally, he set the artwork aside and began to work on other pieces. This portrait of the Last Supper remained unfinished for 11 years. Finally, Da Vinci decided that he had been searching in all of the wrong places. That if he was to find a man that looked like what he thought Judas would have looked like, he would have to search in places where men like that congregate. And at the time, there were 4 prisons on the outskirts of Milan, and so Da Vinci resolved to visit each of the 4 prisons. And in the 3rd prison, he found a man that looked like what he thought Judas would have looked like. He explained to the prisoner what he was doing, and he asked the prisoner, would he agree to pose for this painting? The prisoner agreed, and he was brought under guard from the prison into Milan to Da Vinci's studio. And there he posed for Da Vinci for 4 days as Da Vinci set about finishing his famous portrait of the Last Supper. About halfway through the 4th day, Da Vinci noticed that over the days, the prisoner would look at the painting and then at Da Vinci and then down at the ground, and that every time he did this, a great sadness came upon him. And finally, Da Vinci became so disturbed by what he was witnessing in the prisoner that he stopped painting and he said to the prisoner, "There's something wrong. Am I doing something to upset you?" The prisoner, he put his head down in his hands and he began to weep inconsolably. When he finished crying, he looked up at Da Vinci and he said, "Master, don't you recognize me?" Da Vinci said, "I'm sorry, I don't. Were you one of my students?" The prisoner said, "No, but 11 years ago, I posed for you in this same painting as the person of Jesus." And that's why we avoid silence. That's why we avoid silence. Because in each of us, there is a Judas and a Jesus. In each of us, there is a lesser version of ourselves and a better version of ourselves. And when we come into the silence, we become intimately aware of these two realities at one time. Whenever we step into the silence, we become aware of who we are, strengths and weaknesses, faults, failings, flaws, defects, talents, abilities, potential. But we also become aware of who we are capable of becoming. We become aware of this vision of the best version of ourselves. And in seeing those two things at one time, we're automatically challenged to change, to grow, to develop, to become the best version of ourselves. And that's why we avoid silence, because of that challenge to change, to grow, because of that invitation to transformation. That's why we avoid the silence. That's why we fill our lives with noise. I mean, let's face it, we wake up to clock radios, we listen to radio while we shower, we watch television while we eat breakfast, we listen to radio in the car on the way to work, we listen to radio all day over the intercom. We make phone calls, we get put on hold, we listen to the radio. We got Walkmans and Discmans and cell phones and pages and CDs and DVDs and TVs and internet. We got so much noise we can't even hear our own thoughts. We can't even hear our own. What is the first thing you do when you get in the car? Turn on the radio? No. Why? Because the radio's already on. We've filled our lives with noise. We've filled our lives with noise because silence issues the eternal challenge to become the best version of ourselves. Silence issues the eternal challenge to become all we can be. We fill our lives with noise to avoid that challenge. We fill our lives with noise to avoid that challenge to change, to grow. And in rejecting that challenge to change and to grow, we reject happiness. We reject our chance at happiness. Because as we discussed last night, this journey is life. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, when we're making this journey from point A to point B, when we're changing, when we're growing, when we're developing, when we're becoming the best version of ourselves in each of these four areas of life, we feel more fully alive, we're healthier, we're happier, we have a richer, more abundant experience of life. If it doesn't exist between point A and point B, at very best, it's a waste of time, a waste of life. And so God's invitation, ever since the beginning of time, a call to prayer. For His sake? No. To help Him? No. To make Him happy? No, He's already happy, perfectly contented. God doesn't call us to prayer to help Him, He calls us to prayer to help us. He doesn't call us to prayer to make Him happy, He calls us to prayer to allow us to share in the happiness that is life, lived passionately, energetically, enthusiastically. Prayer. Prayer. People ask me, do you pray? People ask me, why do you pray? Thoreau once wrote, I went to the woods because I wanted to live life deliberately. I went to the woods because I wanted to live deeply, to suck out all the marrow of life. I went to the woods to put to rout all the things that are not life. Because I did not want to come to die and discover that I had not lived. Prayer. Yeah, I pray. Why? Because I can't live without it. I don't know how you survive out there in that crazy, noisy, busy world without that time in silence each day to get a sense of who you are and where you're going. Without that time in silence each day to get reconnected with self, reconnected with God. Prayer? Yeah, I pray. Why? I come to the woods of prayer because I want to live life deliberately. I look around me and most people's lives, they're just a reaction. The doorbell rings, they react. The phone rings, they react. The cell phone rings, they react. The pager rings, they react. Their boss yells at them, they react. Just a series of reactions. I don't want my life to be a reaction. I want my life to be an action. I come to the woods of prayer because I want to live life deliberately. I come to the woods of prayer because I want to live life deeply. I want to suck out all the marrow of life. I come to the woods of prayer to work out what is worthy of life and what is a waste of life. I come to the woods of prayer to put to rout all the things that are not life. I come to the woods of prayer. I come to the woods of prayer because I don't want to come to die and discover that I haven't lived. Prayer. Prayer. Yeah, I pray. I don't know how people live without it. Prayer is essential. Prayer cuts through and clarifies. Prayer reminds us of what is really important. Prayer awakens our awareness to our legitimate needs. Prayer is the great friend who introduces us to ourselves. Prayer is the great mediator who introduces us to our God. Prayer is the faithful friend who points out who we are and who we are capable of becoming. Prayer reveals the deepest desires of our hearts and points out the path that was ordained from the beginning of time. Prayer whispers those golden words, "That is your star. Go now and follow it." Prayer gifts us with purpose and direction and peace in that direction. Prayer is a journey and a destination. Prayer is a chance to become intimately familiar with the better person we know we can be. And that familiarity is the beginning of wisdom. Prayer helps. Prayer is important. Prayer is needed. We need prayer. Prayer doesn't need us, and God doesn't need prayer. Prayer doesn't help God, it helps us. It isn't something we must do. It is something we should do. I pray. I can't help it. I pray because in every moment the need flows out of me. I pray because I am a better person when I do, and a happier person when I am. Prayer, the ageless message, the eternal message, God's invitation to us. Why? Because He knows better than anyone that our lives change when our habits change. Our lives change when our habits change. It's not freak luck. It's not chance. Our lives change when our habits change. 10 minutes a day. Go home tonight, write it down on a small piece of paper, stick it on your bathroom mirror. 6 weeks from now, you won't even recognize yourself or your life. And you'll hear yourself laugh one day. And you'll wonder whether you've laughed that loud since you're a child. And you'll know you're not just surviving. You'll know you're thriving. Because I got to believe that God wants us to thrive. I got to believe, most people out there just getting by, just surviving. I've got to believe that God wants more than that for us. That He wants us to thrive. And it's in the journey that we thrive. Fundamental, foundational habit of life and the journey and happiness, silence, prayer. God's invitation to come into the classroom of silence, to befriend Him, to befriend ourselves. Prayer is like a great love. When you're in love, you don't go to the same restaurant on Friday night at the same time, have the same conversation every week, week in, week out. When you have a great love, there's a dynamic variety to that love. You do different things. It's spontaneous. And that spontaneity and that variety brings a very dynamic element to your relationship. When you first meet somebody, very often you're uncomfortable in silence. When you first meet somebody, very often silence is awkward. You're not comfortable just sitting there in the silence. And very often you end up saying things just to fill the silence, just to fill that void and that awkwardness. But as you become comfortable with a person, as your love for a person deepens, there becomes a great comfort in that silence. And when there's maturity in a love, then you can sit with the person in that silence, and that silence can be a great comfort. The same is true in our relationship with God. The same is true in our prayer life. Very often at the beginning, we don't know what to say. We don't know how to talk to God. The silence feels awkward. The silence feels uncomfortable. But as we get to know God, as we get to know ourselves, as we delve into that relationship with God, we become more comfortable in silence. The saints, the mystics, what did they have? They had that ability to be in the silence with God and to allow God to comfort them enormously in that silence. And in that comfort, in that silence, they found great joy and great strength. Once upon a time, on a glorious summer's evening, in an ancient castle, in the hills, in the outskirts of London, there was a banquet. 600 guests from all over the world. Movie stars, poets, playwrights, politicians, business owners, supermodels, and a handful of people who over the years had endeared themselves to the host and were in the public eye of no particular note. Dinner, glorious, sumptuous meal, wonderful wines from all the best parts of the world. And after dinner, the host steps up, says hello to his guests, and announces that this evening, instead of music or speeches or dancing, he has a treat for them. He's invited one of England's most famous Shakespearean actors to present a selection of Shakespeare's writings. To a gracious applause, the actor stands up and makes his way to the center of the banquet hall, and then begins, one after another, to present excerpts from the writings of William Shakespeare. To be or not to be? Oh, I am fortune's fool. Shall I compare thee? And then, after each presentation, thunderous applause echoes through the castle and up into the courtyards, into the midsummer's evening. For 35 minutes, the actor presents boldly, brilliantly, gently, thoughtfully, passionately the writings of William Shakespeare, and after each little episode, again, the applause thunders through the castle and up into the courtyards. And after 35 minutes, the actor takes his seat. But to thunderous applause, he steps back up for an encore. And as he steps back up to the middle of the banquet hall, he announces that if anyone has any favorite passages from Shakespeare, he would be happy to present them if he knows them. Several people raise their hands, and he calls on one man and he asks for the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. The actor presents it again, powerfully, brilliantly. Another man requests the soliloquy from Macbeth, and again, the actor presents it powerfully, passionately. A young woman raises her hand and requests the 14th sonnet. And then, an elderly gentleman, somewhere down towards the back of the banquet hall, raises his hand. The actor calls upon him, and, well, as it turns out, the old man is a priest. He stands up to be heard, and he says to the actor, I realize it's not Shakespeare, But I was wondering if you would present for us the 23rd Psalm. The actor looks off into the distance and smiles, as if remembering some distant place or time, and then replied, "I would be happy to, Father, on just one condition, and that is that when I'm finished reciting the psalm, you too will recite the psalm for us here this evening." The old man began to shuffle in his place and fidgeted with the tablecloth in front of him. He wanted to hear the psalm, but was unsure about presenting it himself, was uncomfortable presenting it himself. But finally he spoke up agreeing. And with that, the actor began in a loud, powerful, eloquent voice, "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want." And when he'd finished reciting the psalm, the people stood to their feet and they clapped and they cheered like they would never stop clapping and cheering. But when they finally did settle down and return to their seats, the actor looked back down towards the old man and said, "Father, it's your turn now." And as promised, the old man made his way to his feet, shuffled around again nervously and fidgeted with the tablecloth. And then, in a voice that was soft and gentle, he began, "The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I shall want. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside peaceful waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the ways of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley, the shadow of death, I'll not be afraid. For the Lord, he is at my side. His rod and his staff, they comfort and protect me. He prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies. He anoints my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever." And when the priest had finished, nobody clapped, and nobody spoke, and nobody moved. And as the old man slowly sat down, every set of eyes in the banquet hall were fixed on him. And seizing the moment, the actor stood back up and he said, "Do you realize what you've witnessed here tonight?" The people looked at him with a dazed look in their eyes. He said, "What is the difference between my presentation of the psalm and the old man's presentation of the psalm? What makes his presentation so powerful to fill this castle with such a profound silence?" "I'll tell you," he said. "The difference? I know the psalm, but Father, he knows the shepherd." Get to know the shepherd. Get to know the shepherd. If you do nothing else in your life, get to know the shepherd. Because life is short, and you're dead an awful long time. It's proven. This is not idle speculation. Live life passionately, enthusiastically. Love, and love deeply, and always. Laugh often and loudly. But above everything else, embrace your God. Embrace your God, because that, you will discover, is life's purest pleasure. Thank you. Good night.